There is a person in your life who loves you. You know it. You felt it, in the way they look at you a half-second too long, in the way their voice softens when they say your name, in the way their body leans toward you before their mind tells it to stop. And yet, they are not here. They pulled back. They went quiet. They created distance between you and them, like they were building a wall brick by brick, and you were left standing on the other side, pressing your hand against the cold stone, asking yourself the most dangerous question a human being can ask. What did I do wrong? But here's the truth. You may have done nothing wrong at all. What is happening to you right now is not a love story. It is a psychology story. And the chapter you are living inside is one of the most misunderstood, most painful, and most quietly devastating chapters in the entire human experience. Because the person who is pulling away from you is not pulling away from you. They are pulling away from something inside themselves, something so deep, so buried, so suffocating with shame and fear that they cannot even name it. And the tragedy, the real, brutal tragedy, is that your love is the very thing that brought it to the surface. Let that land for a moment. Your love didn't save them. Your love terrified them. Most people don't see this. They search for the flaw in themselves. They replay conversations. They analyze texts. They shrink. They apologize. They perform a kind of emotional contortion, twisting themselves into whatever shape they think will make the other person stay. And the whole time, the real wound is not in the relationship between you. It is in the relationship that person has with themselves, with a self they have been running from for years, possibly decades, possibly their entire conscious life. There is a part of every human being that functions entirely underground, not the part that laughs at dinner, or makes responsible decisions, or shows up to work on time. The deep part, the dark part, the part where all the things that were too painful, too shameful, too threatening to hold in the light got buried. Psychologists call it the unconscious, but you can call it what it really is, the place where a person keeps everything they are afraid to be. And this is where it gets dangerous, because we don't just bury the bad things, we bury the good things too. We bury the parts of ourselves that were once loved and then abandoned. We bury the parts that were once open and then humiliated. We bury the parts that dared to trust and then got shattered for it. And those buried parts don't disappear. They wait. They fester. They grow enormous in the dark. And then, without warning, they get triggered by exactly the kind of love that would have once saved them if they had let it in. Here is the uncomfortable truth you need to hear. The people who are most afraid of intimacy are often the people who want it most desperately. Their longing is not smaller than yours. It may be bigger, hungrier, more consuming. But around that longing, wrapped so tightly it has almost fused with it, is a terror so old and so primal that it doesn't respond to logic. It doesn't respond to reassurance. It doesn't respond to you saying, "I'm not going to hurt you," because it has heard that before. Or rather, the child that still lives inside that person heard it before, from someone they trusted completely, and then felt the floor collapse beneath them. But here's the truth. They are not afraid of you. They are afraid of what you represent. You represent the possibility of being fully seen, of being known completely, without armor, of standing in front of another human being with every wound visible, every fear exposed, every ugly, uncertain, unfinished part of themselves laid bare, and then waiting to find out if they will be accepted or destroyed. And for someone who has been destroyed before in that exact moment of vulnerability, that is not a romantic risk. That is a psychological death sentence. And this is where it gets dangerous, because the mind is not passive. The mind is a survival machine, and when it detects a threat, even a perceived one, even an irrational one, it does not wait for your permission before it acts. It simply begins to withdraw, to create distance, to manufacture reasons. "I'm too busy right now. The timing isn't right. We want different things." Every single one of those sentences is the mind rewriting reality to protect the self from a wound it is convinced will come. Most people don't see this. They take those sentences at face value. They believe the excuse is the reason. They do not understand that the real communication is happening beneath the words, in the tension in the shoulders, in the slight delay before a reply, in the way someone who once looked at you like you were extraordinary suddenly looks at you like you are a problem to be managed. You are watching someone fight a war that started long before you arrived. And the most devastating thing? They may not even know it's happening. The unconscious is not transparent. It doesn't send memos. It simply acts. It simply withdraws. It simply builds the wall. And then the conscious mind, looking at the wall, tries to explain it, tries to justify it, tries to make it make sense. And the story it tells sounds completely reasonable. It sounds calm. It sounds like a decision. But it isn't a decision. It is a defense. And there is a profound difference. The open loop you must hold. If their withdrawal has nothing to do with your worth, then who exactly are they protecting themselves from? There is a mechanism inside the human psyche that operates with terrifying precision. It doesn't require conscious instruction. It doesn't need your awareness or your cooperation, or even your knowledge that it exists. It simply runs, like software written in childhood, never updated, still executing the same commands it was given 40 years ago in a house you've long since stopped living in. And the command it received, the one that still drives everything, can be reduced to a single sentence. If you let someone too close, you will be annihilated. Not hurt, not disappointed, annihilated. That is not hyperbole. That is the actual emotional logic that lives in the subconscious of a person who pulls away from love. Not a rational assessment of risk, not an adult calculation about compatibility. A primal, pre-verbal, bone-deep conviction that closeness is the most dangerous thing in the universe, because once, in the most formative years of their existence, it was. But here's the truth. This is not about you. This is about a ghost. Every person you have ever loved carries inside them a composite image, not of you, of everyone who came before you. The parent who was present but emotionally unreachable, the first love who left without explanation, the friend who shared their darkest secret and then used it against them. Layer upon layer upon layer of evidence that the human heart, when opened, becomes a target. And when you arrived, with your warmth, your consistency, your genuine desire to know them, you didn't erase those layers, you activated them. Every kind thing you did landed not just in the present, but in the echo chamber of the past. And in that echo chamber, kindness sounds suspicious. Consistency sounds like a setup. Genuine interest sounds like the calm before the cruelty. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because the unconscious doesn't distinguish between past and present. It doesn't have a calendar. It doesn't know that you are not the parent, not the first love, not the friend who betrayed. It only knows the pattern, and the pattern says, this is the moment right before everything falls apart. So it acts first. It creates the destruction preemptively. It manufactures the distance, the coldness, the disappearance, because the only thing more terrifying than being left is waiting to be left. If they leave first, they remain in control. If they leave first, they don't have to feel the annihilation. They become the one holding the knife instead of the one bleeding on the floor. What you experienced as abandonment, they experienced as survival. Most people don't see this. They see the cold shoulder and they feel rejected. They see the silence and they feel invisible. They see the exit and they believe it means they weren't enough. And this belief, this particular devastating belief, embeds itself so deeply into a person's psychology that it begins to shape their behavior in every subsequent relationship. They work harder to be enough. They tolerate less. They love more carefully, more guardedly, more conditionally. Because somewhere beneath the surface, they have accepted a lie. The lie that their value is determined by whether or not someone chooses to stay. But here's the truth. The person who left was not making a judgment about your value. They were executing a program they didn't even know they were running. Now let's go deeper. Because there is a hidden contradiction at the center of all of this that almost no one talks about. The person who pulls away from love, they are not whole without it. They ache for connection with an intensity that would break you if you could feel it for even 60 seconds. They lie awake at 3 in the morning, replaying your voice. They catch themselves almost texting you, then stopping, then putting the phone down, then picking it up again. They feel your absence like a phantom limb, this constant, dull, unbearable throb in a place they refuse to name. And yet they do not come back. Why? Because the longing and the terror are not separate forces. They are fused, woven together so completely that to feel one is to feel the other. To desire you is to immediately feel the fear of what wanting you could cost them. To miss you is to immediately feel the threat of what finding you again might demand. And so they hold themselves in this excruciating middle place, close enough to feel the longing, far enough to keep the terror at bay, in a kind of emotional suspension that looks, from the outside, like indifference. But it is the opposite of indifference. It is the most intense, the most exhausting, the most consuming form of feeling a person can experience. And this is where it gets dangerous, because you, watching from the other side of the distance, cannot see the war. You see only the stillness. And in that stillness, you begin to construct your own story. You tell yourself they don't care. You tell yourself you imagined the whole thing. You begin to gaslight yourself, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the alternative is too painful. The alternative is understanding that someone can love you completely and still be incapable of being with you. That love alone is not always enough. That the wound inside another person can be so deep, so structurally embedded, so constitutive of their entire sense of self, that even genuine love, your love, cannot reach it. That is not a failure of your love. That is the tragedy of unhealed psychology meeting a world that keeps demanding intimacy. There is a word for the part of the self that gets hidden to preserve survival: the shadow. Not the evil part, not the monstrous part, the hidden part, the part that was deemed too much, too needy, too vulnerable, too raw to be shown to the world. And the shadow doesn't want to stay hidden. It pushes, it presses against the walls, it leaks out in moments of weakness, in a glance that lasts too long, in a text sent at midnight then regretted, in the way their voice breaks when they say goodbye, as if they are mourning something they haven't even lost yet. They are haunted by what they cannot allow themselves to have, and the unresolved tension that should keep you awake. What happens to a person who spends their whole life refusing to look at what is chasing them? There is a particular kind of suffering that has no name in ordinary language. It is the suffering of a person who has everything they need to be loved, the capacity, the depth, the desire, but who stands at the threshold of real intimacy and cannot cross it. Not because of weakness, not because of cruelty, but because somewhere in the architecture of their psychology, a door was sealed. And the sealing was so necessary, so life-saving at the time, that it became permanent, structural, built into the load-bearing walls of who they are. And you are standing in front of that door, knocking. Here is what repression actually is, not the sanitized textbook version, but the living, breathing, everyday version that is happening to someone you love right now. Repression is not forgetting. Forgetting is passive. Repression is active. It is the mind's continuous, exhausting, relentless effort to keep certain truths below the surface. The truth that they were not protected when they needed to be. The truth that the person who was supposed to love them unconditionally placed conditions on that love so quietly and so consistently that they absorbed those conditions as facts about themselves. I am too much. I am not enough. I am lovable only when I am performing, only when I am useful, only when I am not asking for anything. Those are not beliefs. Those are wounds wearing the costume of beliefs. But here's the truth. You cannot love those wounds away, no matter how patient you are. And this is where it gets dangerous, because patience, your consistency, your willingness to wait, can actually deepen the wound in someone who is not ready to heal. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because every day that passes in which you prove yourself to be safe is another day that their unconscious is forced to reconcile. If they are safe, then why am I still running? And that question is devastating, because it strips away the external justification. It removes you as the reason for the fear. And what remains is the unbearable truth. The problem is not the relationship. The problem is inside them. And facing that truth, really facing it, without flinching, requires a kind of courage that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Most people don't see this. They believe the wall is about you. They accept the distance as a verdict on their worth. They do not understand that the wall went up long before they arrived, and that if they weren't there, the wall would still be there. Facing someone else, keeping out someone else's love, performing the same function it has always performed, protecting a self that learned, at great cost, that being seen is being endangered. Let's talk about what repression costs, not philosophically, physically, emotionally, in lived, daily, embodied experience. A person who represses their need for connection doesn't become free of the need. They become enslaved by it in a different way. The need goes underground, yes, but underground it transforms. It becomes anxiety. It becomes the compulsive drive to control everything, the environment, the relationship, the level of closeness, the rate of vulnerability. Because control is the only substitute for trust that the wounded psyche knows how to use. It becomes rage sometimes, sudden, disproportionate rage at small things, because the small thing was the straw on a haystack that has been building for 30 years. It becomes depression, the flat, grey, motivationless depression of a person who is cut off from their own emotional life, who has learned to live at the surface while the depths of them thrash in silence. And this is where it gets dangerous, because here is what happens when two people with unhealed wounds find each other. Not the fairy tale version, the real version. One of them reaches, the other recoils. The one who reaches, feeling the recoil, reaches harder, because the reaching is also a wound, also a pattern, also a program running on old code. The anxious pursuit and the fearful withdrawal lock into each other like two pieces of a machine that should never have been assembled together. And the machine runs, and runs. And the more one pursues, the more the other withdraws. And the more the other withdraws, the more desperate the pursuit becomes. Each person is acting out of their deepest wound. Each person is unconsciously confirming the other's deepest fear. The pursuer's fear, I am not enough to make someone stay. The withdrawer's fear, if I stay, I will be destroyed. And both of them, both of you, are trapped in a loop that no amount of talking, no amount of trying, no amount of love will break until someone becomes conscious of the pattern, until someone stops running on the old program and asks, who taught me that this is what love looks like? And were they right? But here's the truth. Most people never ask that question, because the question itself is terrifying, because to ask it is to potentially answer it, and to answer it means dismantling something that, for all its damage, has been the central organizing principle of your emotional life. It means grieving not just what happened to you, but who you became because of what happened to you. And grief, real grief, not the performative kind, is the most disorienting, destabilizing, necessary experience a human being can undergo. Grief is what happens when you stop defending the wound and start feeling it. And most people choose the wall over the grief, every single time. Because the wall is familiar, the wall is predictable, the wall has never betrayed them, because the wall, by definition, keeps everything at a safe distance, including betrayal. Push deeper now, because there is something underneath the fear of intimacy that almost no one speaks about, and it is this: the fear of their own power to destroy. Not the fear of being hurt, the fear of doing the hurting. Some people withdraw not because they are afraid of what you will do to them, but because they are afraid of what they will do to you. They have seen the damage of their own unavailability. They have watched someone love them and then slowly come undone from that love. And they carry that damage as evidence. I am not safe to love. I will ruin you the way I ruined them, not on purpose, not with malice, but because I am structurally incapable of giving you what you need. That is not humility. That is a particular kind of pride, the pride of the deeply wounded person who has made their damage into their identity, who has decided that their brokenness is permanent, and therefore protecting others from it is the most loving thing they can do. The near breaking point is this. What if the most loving thing they believe they can offer you is their absence? You have been waiting for an answer that would make the pain make sense. You have been waiting for a reason so clear, so certain, so structurally sound, that you could finally stop carrying the weight of the question. Why did they leave? Why won't they stay? Why can they love me and still choose distance? And I'm going to give you that answer now. Not the comfortable version, the real one. The real one lives beneath every defense, beneath every excuse, beneath every rationalization and reframing and carefully constructed narrative about timing and readiness and circumstances. Strip all of that away, go all the way down, and at the very bottom, at the absolute bedrock of why someone who loves you cannot be with you, you will find this. They do not believe they deserve you. Not because you are extraordinary, though you may be. Not because you are difficult, though you may have moments of that too, but because the self they carry, the self that was formed in the years before they had any choice about who they were becoming, that self received a verdict, an early, devastating, nearly indelible verdict about its own worth. And that verdict says, people like you do not get to keep love. People like you are allowed proximity, but not permanence. People like you can experience warmth, but the moment it becomes real, the moment it becomes something you could actually lose, you must destroy it first, before it destroys you. That verdict is not true. It has never been true. But here's the truth. A verdict handed down in childhood by the people who were your entire world doesn't require evidence to sustain itself. It requires only repetition. And the psyche, in its compulsive need for coherence, for the world to confirm what it already believes about itself, repeats it. It finds the evidence, it creates the situations, it withdraws from love and then points to the resulting distance as proof. See? I told you. People leave, I knew they would. They always do. Except in this version, and this is the part that should break you open, they are the ones who left. They are the ones who created the distance. They are simultaneously the victim of the wound and the unconscious architect of the outcome that confirms it. This is the closed loop of unexamined trauma. This is how people spend 40 years re-experiencing the same loss in different faces, different names, different settings, never understanding that the variable that stays constant is not the other person. It is them. It is the story they carry about what they are allowed to receive. And this is where it gets dangerous. You showed them who they could be, and they were not ready to be that person yet. Maybe they never will be. Maybe they will spend the rest of their lives circling the fire of genuine intimacy, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to avoid the burn. Maybe the wall stays up. Maybe the program keeps running. Maybe the verdict never gets challenged. Or maybe one day, in some quiet and unpredicted moment, the weight of what they have been carrying becomes greater than the fear of putting it down. Maybe the loneliness, the real, bone-deep, 3 in the morning loneliness of a person who has chosen distance so many times that distance has become the only home they know. Maybe that loneliness finally says something louder than the fear. Maybe it says, enough. But that is not your moment to create. That is not your work to do. That is the work of a person standing alone in front of the mirror they have been avoiding, asking the only question that has ever mattered. What am I so afraid of finding? And the answer, when it finally comes, will not be a monster. It will be a child who needed love and learned to survive without it. A child who deserved better and decided they deserved nothing. A child who is still, after all these years, all this armor, all this distance, still waiting, still hoping, still, in the deepest and most secret room of the self, believing that somewhere, someone might love them well enough to make the waiting worth it. The most haunting truth in all of human psychology is not that people are afraid of love. It is that they are afraid of receiving it, of standing still long enough to let it land, of being for once the person who does not run. They love you. They are terrified of that love, and until they are more afraid of losing themselves than of finding themselves, you will remain the one they couldn't stay for. Not because you weren't enough, but because they hadn't yet become someone who believed they deserved to stay. The person who walks away from love isn't escaping it. They are escaping the version of themselves that love demands them to become.